On this episode of Couch Conversations.
One of the worst things we can do in our relationships is to put a burden on people that is only meant to be brought to Christ. And Christ solves that.
Welcome to Couch Conversations, a podcast for women who want to chat about real life issues. Hi, I'm Courtney B. We're talking about what it means to be a woman of God today, how to find purpose in life, and how to deal with tough conversations. So grab a cup of coffee and join us on the couch for some good conversation. Welcome to the Women of Influence podcast. Today we have a friend of mine and one of my business coaches, Mark Dutton with Leading Clear. Thanks for being on, Mark.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Yes. So we're going to be tackling a really, I think, special topic for me and probably a lot of women listening, friendships in the workplace and how to honor boundaries and each other. So I'll kick us off with a prayer and then we'll get into some good conversation.
Awesome.
All right. Father, we just thank you for this opportunity to have this conversation. I thank you for this friendship that you've given me and Mark and our families. And thank you for this opportunity to share conversation around such a special topic. We just ask that your Spirit would bring into the conversation all the things that you want us to talk about, that every woman listening or man would feel encouraged and seen and heard, and that they would feel a sense of peace knowing that they're not the only one that may struggle with some of the topics we talk about. Just let Mark and I speak freely and vulnerably in a way that glorifies you and loves on each other. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you.
All right. So, yes, I will preface this by saying, so Mark is one of my coaches, so I kind of feel like I'm snagging an extra 15 or so minutes with him to actually talk about a topic that's relevant. This topic came to mind because I've obviously, like probably a lot of us, I've gone through some of the challenges of being friends with people I work with, and navigating, especially I think nowadays, the importance of friendship and close-knit. You've got virtual work as a new thing that we're tackling. And so lots of new challenges, but then some of the same old of just, you spend so much time with people you work with, you naturally become friends in some ways. But then you also, there's some intentionality to making those friendships. But then where do you draw the lines of the boundary lines so that you're still honoring each other in that space? So thoughts?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for asking me to be on the podcast with you. Being a man interviewed on Women of Influence podcast, I think it's probably more comfortable for me, mainly because I've been able to see pieces and parts in my wife's involvement and your conference and, getting to hear it. So my heart, it's not just this name, I've seen your heart for it, and that's been awesome. And this is a topic you and I talked about early on, of just like, how do you do that? How do you keep your position of leadership and really just to be able to guide people without it, in keeping friendships without it getting in the way? Because it gets like, hold on, am I wearing my boss hat or am I wearing my friend hat right now? And those are real human experiences of navigating. How do you approach this? And a lot of times we are informed by our experiences that we've had in the past. So I will quote unquote label that baggage. Okay. There's good baggage, there's bad baggage, but we have a paradigm because of what we've experienced in workplace friendships in the past and as we go forward. So I think, the main highlight, if there's one thing that I want to try to be clear about, is it's been a journey for several years for me. I'll probably closer to 10. One of our mentors, Leanne and I's mentors, our pastor at a time in Colorado, used the term with me, appropriate vulnerability. And that comes from, I've always had a heart for pastors and people in leadership in the church, just because I feel like it's such a hard spot to be in, right? You're kind of held to a higher standard. People don't view you as human half the time because they don't get the fact that you got to get up and put your pants on every day the same way, one foot at a time. And you have the same struggles, but you're expected to to operate in this like supernatural way because of your title, and that's just not true. So I've always been intrigued by how people in those positions operate in relationship and in their roles, and how do you interact humanly and be vulnerable without losing that position of respect, or honor even. And not because I'm not talking about the ego side, right? That's an easily slippery slope. But like in the actual side of like, man, how do I be my full self without it becoming a stumbling block? And I'll use that word, stumbling block, for others to see me rightly in my role. And that's a complex situation. And but he answered that question to me as I was kind of like, how do you do it? How do you do this in this? How are you a pastor and still have friendships? And how do you feel about these things? And he said it's a very difficult thing to learn, but it's an important thing to learn, is appropriate vulnerability. And I think we know what vulnerability is. I think I call it the Brene Brown effect, right? She's done a great job of kind of blasting this concept out into the stratosphere. One of my favorite authors, Patrick Lencioni, also writes about this topic of like being open and real in your honest self and healthy conflict and being just an honest full self even in the workplace. And that leads to healthy relationships in the workplace as well as just a healthy culture. Right. So those two people, I think, have really done a great job of laying a strong foundation for us to be aware of vulnerability in general. But I think the simplest way to explain appropriate vulnerability is saying, how can I be my true and authentic self? But I'm going to choose how much detail to share. I'm not changing. I'm not becoming my not authentic self. But how do I become my authentic self? But only share the details and the layers deep as is appropriate to the history of the relationship and the person that I'm in the relationship's maturity to navigate that.
That's good.
Okay. And that is not a judgment on them. But there are people that I will say I would feel uncomfortable opening up my business and saying, here's exactly how much money we make. Here's what our expenses are, because based on their history and their life situation, that it may become a stumbling block for them. They may not be able to process that because that's just out of their realm. But at the other side, I'm an open book to people who say like, how do you do this? It's like, well, here you go. Here, open the hood. Here's everything. I want to teach you and show you, because I know, or believe at least in my discernment, that they have a level of maturity and life experience that will be able to relate to it and appreciate it without it being like a comparison, right? Oh, you're doing that and I'm not there. And you know what I mean? Or it become a stumbling block. I wish I had that, if only I had that. So that's just one small example of like what I mean by that. But that is the framework that I think is important to have in any relationship, but especially in the workplace, of this is something kind of private about me that I need to be discerning on whether I share, not because I feel like I need to hide and portray myself in a certain way. But the question is the person that I'm sharing this in a position of maturity or perspective that can handle this without it being a stumbling block? And if you can answer that question, you really start to be able to honor, because we're called as Christians not to be a stumbling block to our brothers and sisters. If I've got someone who struggles with something, I don't want to throw it in their face and say, well, you just need to be tougher about it, right?
Well, and also like as a leader, you have people that are looking to you, whether you're coaching them, leading them in a business, leading them, in any dynamic, any aspect, they're looking to you as the person that will either have the answer or go find it. And a lot of times I've found that leadership for me is just, I might not know, and I might be just as nervous as the people that I'm leading, but they look over at me and I'm like that flight attendant that the plane is shaking, you know what I mean? But I'm like, it's all good. I'm just like, you need something, buckle your seatbelt. It might get bumpy, but I think when you share, I'm learning to your point, if you share too much detail with certain people, it's not that they're not trustworthy or you don't love or honor them or any of that or want them in that space of your life. It's just, again, to your point, it may create a stumbling block. They might not find as much peace in your calm in the middle of that storm because they see you struggling with things that you've shared with them. So your voice and your guidance and your even correction, your all of that, you can almost water it down by too much of the things you struggle with being on display for them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, unfortunately, we do live in a comparison environment where people will say, well, you struggle with that, so I'm not listening to you. Or like, you don't do that well, you're a hypocrite. And unfortunately, that gets thrown around a lot. So yeah, it's hard to navigate that. But I wanted to kind of lay that framework of like appropriate vulnerability, but I want to take a step back and ask you a question of like we asked the question, like, how do we understand boundaries, friendships in the workplace? Well, what are friendships? What is the purpose of friendships? How do we know what a healthy friendship even is?
Yeah. Well, my answer would be someone that you're, like you said, willing to be vulnerable with, someone that you trust. There's a reciprocated trust. There's got to be alignment. I'm also learning, and Leanne's, talked with me about this even, that, and I never really got this concept till recently. You have different friends for different seasons, and you have different types of friendships even happening simultaneously. So I kind of grew up thinking all friendships were just full trust, full vulnerability, full alignment, meaning we had everything in common. And then I'm now realizing a friendship isn't worse or better because we have all this in common. Some friends are my friends about, they will hold me to the word. They will speak encouragement and life-giving into me. They will help me redirect, but they're not going to be the ones I can relate to over kids because they're not parents or they're not in the same season. So we have different things that we find synergy through. So those different types of friendships are either for different reasons or different seasons. And so I guess my short answer is there's a reciprocal trust, there's a level of vulnerability, and there's some alignment in life or passions or seasons. That's usually what friendship is to me. My understanding of friendship.
Yeah. And the only thing I would add to that would be of care and even love.
Yeah.
True. What does it mean to be in a position of, you said, mutual reciprocated trust, but reciprocated care. And if I'm just completely honest, if I look back at a lot of friendships that I desired to be more than they were, or even workplace ones where I would just say maybe ended in disappointment of man, I thought we were connected, but based on activity or behavior, I'm questioning what that friendship was, I think a lot of us go seeking for care and to be seen in certain relationships that we aren't. We do more of the giving than we do the receiving, and it's not balanced or aligned in that way. And I think friendships aren't about being greedy and it's about what I get. Don't hear what I'm not saying, because I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is I have been I'll use the word victim of being ignorant or expecting someone to see me the way I see them and not putting that relationship in its right spot. So what that does is I'm giving part of myself to someone who maybe doesn't reciprocate that. And what happens is that means I'm not giving it to other people who are reciprocating it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's
so good. There is an element of are we both pouring into the same pond? Are we both cultivating the same environment of when we meet and have conversations, is this something where we're both built up? If we look at the word really tells us the purpose of our relationships in the body is to build one another up and encouragement, and to mourn with those who mourn, who grieve with those who grieve, and to celebrate with those who celebrate, to rejoice with those who rejoice. Do you see with those who rejoice? We're doing it together. There's a togetherness that takes place in a friendship. And so I think one of the other boundaries that you need to say is we should treat, I'm a believer that we should treat all human beings with dignity and respect and appreciate their humanity. That's their imperfection, that's their quirks, that's their strengths, all the pieces. We should be able to love people because, again, the word tells us, what is it of you if you love those who love you back? Anybody can do that.
Right.
How do you love those who are against you or are not for you or don't love you back? we're called to love and provide respect and dignity to people. But in friendships, I think we need to ask ourselves, is this an acquaintance or is this a friendship? Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of acquaintances that we are overly vulnerable with that are not friendships. And that is one of those boundaries that get us in trouble, for lack of better words, because unfortunately it probably leads to, that was an acquaintance. There was not an alignment or a reciprocal trust. You were looking for feedback from somebody or engagement with somebody. And so you shared some things about yourself that then come back around to hurt you because that person is either insecure or has some baggage there that doesn't protect, they're not for your good. They're just kind of like, that's just the reality. So I guess it's sex of like, how to honor boundaries, be honest and realistic with yourself. Is this an acquaintance where we share a space and I'm called to honor and to respect this person? Or is this a friendship where we are cultivating an environment of growth and development for each of us for our good? And there's a commitment to following through on that. And I just think that's important to really define the difference between those things.
And specifically in the workplace, I mean, what are your thoughts on, is it good to have those true, deep friendships with colleagues, with people you lead or people you work with, when it may bleed over into, like we talked about, people seeing your leadership through a different lens, or people, having a kind of preconceived notion of why you're making even recommendations related to work because they've got some background on what you're going through personally, or.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a two-edged sword, right? There's the good and the bad side of that. Because if I have a friendship with someone, I'm more likely to lead them in their humanity, right? Because we talk all the time when you're in leadership, you're not just a boss, you're a counselor, you're a coach, you're an ear to vent to. Like it just happens. And a lot of times if someone's not performing in the workplace, it's usually something else going on in their life. And if I know them deeply and well and intimately even, I can provide guidance that I wouldn't be able to do. A lot of times in I'll call the corporate world, we'll see people's weaknesses and we'll just dismiss it as inability or, not having the grit to get through it. And we don't see the humanity. We don't know what those other aspects are to their life. So it's hard to actually care for people well in the workplace if we don't know them. But on the flip side of that, they may know you too well and they may not listen. And so I think those go back to, what's the environment of your workplace? And also don't jump in the pool right away. Put your toe in, walk down the stairs. So there's an element as we should give more time to relationships, to friendships, to identify and discern that trust and not, hey, we have an alignment in life or interest, so we must be great friends.
Right.
There's an element of like, oh, there's a connection there. Let me explore that.
Right.
And allow it to be a slow time of peeling back the layers. And because what happens is as you peel back the layers, you might experience something that says, oop, hold on a second. I may have crossed the boundary of appropriate vulnerability here. I'm not sure this person can know these things about me and properly continue, because you can start to feel that friction.
Right.
Now, okay, hold on. I see now. Well, guess what? I was only one step further. I can slowly peel that back and stay out that other stair and say, for this season, this is where this friendship needs to be.
Yeah, and that's key, I think, for this season. I've experienced that personally. Just, I think the appropriate vulnerability is right on. And I think being okay with having friendships or relationships, right, that have different depths and different boundaries, and not even just per relationship, but for different seasons. I think it's not an all or nothing. Every friendship and every relationship doesn't look the same, and each of them don't look the same through every season. And so just pacing and toeing, putting the toe in and walking that out and having grace with yourself, having grace with them. I think those are good advice.
Yeah. One other thing that I've learned through my wife who's it's been awesome to watch her journey of relationships. I was always the extroverted one who had lots and lots and lots of friends that I would call them friends. And she'd be like, "Are they really your friends?" And I'm like, "Of course they're my friends." And I've learned over time that, wow, I had a skewed view of that word and what it meant for myself. But she's been using the term like observe without judging. And man, it's really, really been hit hard of like, when you interact with someone and you have one of those moments like that was either weird or you're kind of offended, but you don't know why. You're like that kind of, so observe without judging, be aware, take note of it, but don't try to draw a definitive conclusion about it because you may not know about them enough to know what's actually going on. And I promise you, I don't care what friendship it is. I don't care if it's a marriage. There's always more to the story than you can be aware of. And it takes time and trust and care to peel back those layers to truly understand. Leanne and I have been married for 14 years. There's some things that have come up this week that I've been like, man, now that I know that more clearly, holy cow, does that make a lot of things make more sense? Like, I get where you're coming from. I know you better. Like, I now know you because you've been vulnerable with me, shared with me what you feel in a certain situation. And I can see how that has repetitively either been hurtful or offensive over the course of time. And she trusted me enough to share it, but it allows me to know her better, which means I can care for her better and love her better. And so, and it's so that observe without judging is just saying that's a good tool to have in your toolbox as you navigate how far should I go with this relationship. Observe, take note into context. Don't make an overwhelming decision or judgment on somebody or a situation or relationship based on something you observed. It's okay to observe it. It's good to observe it. Be observant. But don't cast a judgment based on one observation.
Several.
Yeah. Make several. Let time ride out and not be in a hurry in that relationship. So I think that was just one of the other things that clicked that I was like, I think this is important.
That's
for this conversation.
Good one. Yeah. A lot of pace, walking things out. We live in a world that's fast, quick, to the point, get it done. And relationships just don't happen like that.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of things don't happen like that. Lots of the good things, but relationships being one of them. So that was good. I love appropriate vulnerability, having grace to have different levels of friendship or different types of friendships for different seasons. Observe without judging. Good stuff. Any last final thoughts as we wrap up that you want, these women or men to hear as they're listening and just be encouraged by?
One thing I'd add to the summary is just discern between friendships and acquaintances is one other summary there. I just add to that wrap up, just because I think, again, that's where it hit home for me. I really had a wake up call when I started to realize that. And acquaintances aren't bad. I'm not dismissing acquaintances. I'm just putting them in the proper place. And then my last thing would just be in relationships, a lot of times boundaries and strain in a relationship are because we put someone in a position they were never meant to be. Meaning we give them a position in our life and we expect something from them that we never meant to be. And I'm still a student of this, but marriage, number one, but other relationships definitely as well still, is that like, my wife can't be Jesus for me. My friends cannot be Jesus for me. And as a relational person, as an extrovert who loves building relationships with people, getting to know people, I love hearing people's stories. One of the worst things we can do in our relationships is to put a burden on people that is only meant to be brought to Christ. And like Christ solves that. And so being able to say like my fulfillment, my identity, all those things, I have to come from Christ first. And if I rely on the people in my relationships, I don't care if it's a workplace, a child, a marriage, a best friend, just ask yourself the question, am I expecting them to be who Jesus was meant to be for me? And so when we put our relationships in that lens, that is, we can love ourselves better and we can love people better.
Good stuff. I'm so glad you're on here. This was helpful. I feel like I got a little session out of this too.
It's always a pleasure to spend time with you.
Yeah. Mark Dutton, Leading Clear, your coaching business. And what else do you do?
I run a real estate team, and I'm also a realtor here locally in Gloucester County and the surrounding areas. So a little bit of everything.
Awesome realtor, awesome dad who was up most of the night with a sick little guy. So good husband, good friend, good guy to know. So we're honored to have you as our first gentleman on the Women of Influence podcast. Thanks for braving it.
I appreciate you having this great conversation.
Take it easy, Mark.
Bye.
Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of the Couch Conversations. I hope you're inspired and ready to tackle the day knowing you're loved and have a purpose. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'd love it if you left us a rating and a review so more people can join us on this journey. We'll see you next time.